Okay, well, look, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you might be joining us for 30 Minutes Talks. It's great to have yet another exciting show lined up for this week's webinar. We've got a great speaker to join us today, who's we've never had on before, the Master of Disaster, Mr. Bert, Dr. Bert van Walbeek, and I'll be looking forward to introducing Bert in a moment. To begin with, we'd like to thank all our academic partners for joining us and supporting what we're doing here. So from Lyceum University in the Philippines, University of Santo Tomas, our friends at NCUT in Taiwan, the Macau Association of Hospitality and Tourism Educators, and here where I'm based at Sunway University in Malaysia. So we've got a great, I think, hopefully 30 minutes for us today. Before we get started today, we're going to be hearing about 90 seconds, a great thought. And Dr. Andy, who we look forward to each week, giving us his 90-second thoughts. Andy, over to you.
My name is Dr. Andy Nazarechuk, and welcome to 90 Seconds, featuring tourism topics from around the world. Today, our subject is going local. The United Nations World Tourism Organization just released its tourism barometer last week, showing statistics from around the world, and the news is not good. As you can see from this chart, COVID-19 has brought international tourism to a standstill. In the month of April, international arrivals declined 97%, and there was some type of travel restriction in 100% of all destinations worldwide. In April, Spain had almost zero tourists, when they should have had around 5 or 6 million. Many tourism operators are going out of business. The Greek island of Santorini has lost 90% of its income due to the lack of tourists, but they have kept their businesses open to provide jobs for the local community. The people of Santorini are supporting each other by going local. We commonly take our own attractions for granted. For example, how many of those who live in the Philippines have been to the rice terraces in Banaue, which are considered to be the 8th man-made wonder of the world? Sagata is another popular destination famous for its caves, hanging coffins, and pine tree-covered mountains. Have you been there? Boracay has what many consider to be the best beach in the world. Intramuros in Manila was constructed in the late 16th century. Many of you have visited Intramuros. Some of you go to school inside its walls. But have you really toured it like a tourist? As soon as it is safe for us to travel domestically, we need to visit our own local attractions. Be safe, follow all the rules, wear your mask, wash your hands, social distance, and do everything necessary to protect yourself. We must support our local tourism and hospitality businesses. They need our support. Finally, we will all benefit greatly from experiencing the beauty of our own country. Thank you for joining me for 90 seconds.
And just one announcement, we will be announcing our funniest Zoom background today. This is part of our background challenge that we started last week, and we have submissions, and we decided to go with the funniest one today. We'll be showing it at the end of the show. And also for everyone here, again, we are opening it up. So if you want to send your ideas and your backgrounds, please send them to us this week before next week's show. And I'm going to turn, with that, I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Hobson. It's all yours, Perry.
Thanks very much, Andy. And again, welcome to everybody this week. And particularly, we've got, I'm looking forward to having our speaker this week, Dr. Bert van Walbeek, who's joining us from Thailand. So look, this week, we're going to focus on what about the future. There's been a lot of talk, obviously, about the COVID situation, but I think it's also worthwhile us thinking a little bit further ahead. It's also worth us thinking, what next? And those are some of the focuses that we thought we'd bring into this week. So I'm just going to share some thoughts with you first, and then hand over to our speaker. So this week, how are we going to get ready for this post-COVID world that we're going to be existing in? And so it's getting prepared for that and thinking through that as to what some of that will mean. Now, as I mentioned in my introduction, I'm Professor Perry Hobson. I'm based here at Sunway University here in Malaysia. And it's a background, a history that I've had looking at where the tourism industry is going, not just today, but looking ahead to the future. I'm very pleased that this week I've been able to work with our speaker who's joining us today on looking ahead to 2030, asking ourselves, what does the future hold? What does the industry hold for us? And questioning where things will be going, because we will get through this COVID situation, but what then comes next? Now, I've been fortunate because I've got two streams to my thinking on this. One is about technology, the other is about sustainability. So I was speaking last year in Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam at a conference that focused very much on smart tourism and looking at the technology side. The other part of me spends time looking at the future. And often I spend a week a year in Innsbruck giving a series of guest lectures to students there working on looking at the future. And it's very interesting looking at their focus on sustainability. So when we think about the future, what's our plan? What's our plan as an industry? Are we just going to sleepwalk into this? We're going to stick our heads in the sand? What do we see and how do we see this going forward? And what do we want and imagine our future can be? I mean, do we just want it to be a repeat of what 2019 was? And if we think back to that, let's consider what happened in 2019. Most of us were concerned and talking about over-tourism. The fact that destinations such as Venice, beaches around Krabi, we had protests against tourists. So that was where we were at. So the question is, do we want to go back to that, or do we want to vision something different? Well, there is going to be more disruption ahead. We found post the COVID era very disruptive, but what comes next? Will we have even more disruption, and how are we going to adapt to that? And so the question very much in my mind is, how do we prepare ourselves and think through some of those things? So what if? What if there is no vaccine? Because so much of the premise I've heard is based on the fact we'll find a vaccine and things will go back to normal. But what if there isn't? What if this COVID virus mutates and changes every year like the flu virus does? What happens when we get these spikes? Just this week, we've seen spikes in Melbourne, Australia, in Beijing, in Leicester in the UK, and today I was just reading the news from Texas, which is not at all good. So how are we going to handle this when counter-COVID measures become like our counter-terrorism measures? What's going to happen to our convention and cruise ship industries, which we've discussed already in past webinars? So we have to start thinking about what this future is going to look like. It's by no means going to be certain. So how can we start thinking through some of those uncertainties and working this forward? Even this week, The Economist ran front page asking ourselves, what's going to be the next catastrophe? Now, I don't want to be the pessimist. I'm rather an optimistic kind of person. But the reality is the tourism industry has had to deal with fires and floods, epidemics and pandemics, wars and terrorism, recessions and depressions, climate change, and disruptions to technology. And yes, let's not forget asteroids, because after all, they did wipe out the dinosaurs. So whether we like it or not, there are going to be issues out there that we're going to have to think about addressing. As we think forward, we can think about how we can forecast, how we can create scenarios, and how we can backcast from the future. And this is some of the tools that I help with students to work through. And these can be really quite useful in terms of thinking through that. So just for the airline industry, if we think about that for a moment, one scenario for the airline industry was it was always going to be faster, which led the UK and France to design Concorde. We were going to get from cities very quickly. It was fast, but it was very expensive. Then came the Boeing 747 and A380s, because fast wasn't the key, it was big. It was moving more people in the age of mass tourism. Concorde was discontinued nearly 20 years ago. It's now been announced that they're going to not be building any more A380s or Boeings. So they were grand, but they were costly. What has won the day seems to be efficiency, getting people on smaller size planes, but from point to point. So different scenarios are working. So the question is, looking forward to this, how do we envision a future? So in the case of this, Toyota has already said they will not be making petrol engines from 2040. They've got a vision. They have put a point in the future and are now working back from that. The tourism industry needs to be able to think forward to that. We need to think, how are we going to vision that future? And what do we need to do to get back from that? Technology is going to be part of that. We can see here this rapid, very rapid acceleration growth of technology, how people have adapted. It took over 200 years to move from the printing press to the telescope. And yet in the space of just 20 years, after all, the iPad was only invented 10 years ago. Kathy Enns, a professor at Cornell University, when she looked at the hospitality industry, she said, a lot of things that we do in the industry are artifacts of another time. And the challenge is that hotels miss opportunities to rethink how things are done. So the question then becomes, how can we revision? How can we think about how things can be done? So that we're not operating museums of the past, but businesses that are focused on the future. We can see this already happening. A lot of the industry has talked about Industry 4.0. And I'd like to focus us on Tourism 4.0, because we've got tourists who are going to be connected and interconnected. Our destinations are going to see a whole new wave of this connectivity. Just this weekend, I went shopping. Every shop I went into, I had to use a QR code to go in. So we're going to be seeing an enormous amount of connectivity that wasn't there before. So imagine looking at a streetscape, as you can see on the screen now, where you can see every bus, taxi, person, and you can connect with them. This is going to bring us unrivaled connectivity as we go forward. And destinations, this is Prague, has already got a plan worked out for 2030 for their connectivity. So not only is tourism going to be connected, we've now got to think about hotels and restaurants and how they're going to be connected to it. Let's imagine for a moment if forward-thinking people ran hotels. How would Elon Musk run his hotel if he had the Tesla hotel? Well, for a start, you'd arrive in an electric car and a rocket. He'd probably have his hotels not only on the Earth, but the Moon and Mars as well. And I'm sure it would be carbon neutral. If the inventor James Dyson had a hotel, every electric item in the hotel would be redesigned. Yes, he'd probably even come up with a Dyson toilet too. And Jack Ma, who started Alibaba, well, hang on, he has started a hotel. He's already got the Fly Zoo Hotel in China. So we can begin to have some glimpses of the future to see the sorts of things that are happening now and will be happening in the future. We need some more radical design. Every year there is in fact a radical innovation contest that's run in the US at the UNLV. So I guess the question is going to be, how can we think through radical design, not only in terms of hotel design, but operations and systems? So if we want to shift hospitality, we're going to have to start thinking radically. We've got to think outside the box to the future. And that future is also going to be a sustainable future. Because obviously, once we get through COVID, all those questions about sustainability will not go away. The UN has focused on this for the 2030 UN Sustainability Goals. At Sunway University, we've already got the Jeffrey Sachs Center, which was set up to honor the guy who put together those sustainability goals. Although he's based at Columbia University in the US, he comes every year to Sunway University. And again, we have to think through how tourism is going to envision, embrace, and adapt to this new normal, because these issues won't go away. COVID may be our problem now, but we've also got to think long term. So whether it's about your hotel being carbon neutral, organic, meat-free, and you're going to recycle everything, we have to think about that now. And COVID may not and should not just push these ideas into the background. Already, many chains have got themselves their environmental footprint. This one is from Hilton. They've cut it by half. Is half good enough? We don't want to end up on the wrong side of history. We don't want to end up on that scrap heap. We're going to have a bright future. The question is, we have to think through how we can develop and design that future. So I don't want to alarm people. My question is always, each week, is to have something for you to walk away to think about. So keep calm as always, but be ready, and we have to plan that. So now it gives me great pleasure to introduce our speaker for this week. And Bert has been someone I have worked with and known for many, many years. And he's often known around the industry as the master of disaster, largely because he's kept raising to people and making them think about the issues that the industry has to face. and that it just can't just keep sleepwalking through what it does. And I know he's got a lot of concerns about how the industry has been looking at things, and we don't need to think about today and the current crisis, but we need to prepare ourselves for the future too. Bert, it's great to welcome you to 30 Minutes. Thanks so much for joining us this week. How are things in northern Thailand?
Very cool and very pleasant. And we're living in a bubble where we notice very little of what's happening around the world. So there it is. Okay, good. Please let me be the devil advocate in this discussion by asking all of you, is in tourism the next normal going to be the old normal? Traffic jams are back, planes flying again, bigger crowds in supermarkets, on beaches, and pollution is nearly back at the old level. So many people say soon the new normal will catch up with the old normal. And that's exactly what I see from the behavior of people in general and tourists specifically. They are looking back for the old normal of being together. This, ladies and gentlemen, will be the first presentation you will hear without the C word in it, because I think it's about time we stop blaming and talking about it, but we start looking ahead and start wondering and finding solutions on how to take our industry, our wonderful industry, forward. As you heard, my name is Dr. Bert from Walbeek. I'm well known not only because of crisis management, but also of wearing bow ties. I'm a hotelier by default. I learned in my hotel career handling crisis by necessity, and I am these days an academic by compassion, very much believing in Murphy's Law. If anything can go wrong, it will go wrong. This was the first time things went wrong in my career. In Morocco, 1967, the Arab-Israel war broke out, and in Morocco, we had no business, and I was furloughed for various weeks while working in this hotel in Tangiers. So nothing new. Over the years, I learned, and this resulted in 2 publications that I have written, both basically with the help of the PATA organization. One of my big successes is that one of the few destinations in Asia that is looking forward was, or is, Macau, who about 10 years ago started this tourism crisis management office. And another success is, again, how we were able, again with PATA, to help Nepal back on top of the world with our crisis management expertise. I learned this a long time ago. Here you see me together with the general manager of the Munich Sheraton Hotel, and he had a terrible habit of asking all of his department heads what can go wrong when we had big events. Then determine what risks you have to deal with, and then make sure you come up with strategies, with ideas to handle them. And this has become part of my DNA, and it has never stopped again. So learning that risks create incidents, incidents create crisis, and crisis disasters. Crisis disasters is something I have been telling and teaching about for many, many years to any university and any organization that is willing to look forward. It's all about leadership, and not this kind of leadership, you do it, you do it, you do it, and at the end nobody does it, but clear leadership. But please don't forget, this is not the first time this is happening to the world. We had this already in 500 years after crisis, and 30 to 50 million people died. We had the swine flu in 2009. where a lot of people died too. And of course, we had the flu pandemic in 1890, where the death toll was 1 million, and exactly the same remedies were told to use as we are being told now. Restez chez vous, stay home, lavez vos mains, wash your hands. That's nothing new there. But every time these kind of things are over, we forget it and we go back to the old normal. Social distances, the petticoats were making sure that was happening. And if you see all the statues being pulled down, again, that happened already many times in history too. So let's not try to look too much as if these are things that have never happened before, but let's start looking at how we can be better prepared. Because as the clouds now start lifting, complacency will make a comeback. And you only have to look television or read the newspapers, and you see how everybody is fighting about wearing no masks and all these kind of things, social distancing and so on. Because social distances now is by many people considered asocial distances. And staying home is an attack on civil liberties. So again, we have to look at not only the results and the consequences of the crisis, but also at how mankind is handling this. We are back to parties. We are back to full beaches. And we don't know what's that gonna cost in many more months, although there are some clear signs in the United States that it's gonna cost many more lives than needed. But politics is all about jobs, and jobs are all about tourists, and tourists are all about now everybody can fly, which is a wonderful philosophy, but has its challenges. Soon the tourists will be packed in planes, coaches, trains, and on beaches like sardines in a can. And again, you see those pictures coming up everywhere. Soon the 3S, the sand, sun, and sex effect of tourism will erase, and the 2020 memories of Joe and Jane Public will disappear, and they are going back to the old normal too. As Perry already mentioned, we need to start looking forward more about what can be done for avoiding or reducing the next catastrophe. There's always a next crisis just around the corner. And history repeats itself time and time again, and we make the same mistakes again. It's nice to see that some of the female leaders in this world handle this kind of crisis much better than some of the male leaders. No further comment. And again, people being generous and following countries like Taiwan that did a great job and was very proactive, and after SARS already started planning this in great detail. So what will happen next? Could be war. Could be another flood. Could be everything. These are all the crises I handled one way or another in my career. And normally after a crisis, the tourism industry reunited for a couple of weeks, sometimes months, and then we all went back to normal, back to business as usual. And all these signs suddenly are not being noticed anymore. So as we await the recovery, what are we going to do? What lessons should we learn? Well, first of all, we have to do soul searching. And not only moan and groan of what happened in the past, but how are we going to do it better? Where are we going to improve and make sure next time we are better prepared? Global deep cleaning. Perry already talked about the various goals of the United Nations. This will not go away. And again, this will happen. And actually, at the moment, I see more plastic being used because of this situation than before. Can we find a balance sheet between making money and being green? How can we do that? And how can it be sustainable and proactively avoiding any next situations without being catched unprepared? Building back better. Many organizations have worked on that. The United Nations, ISDR, is doing a great job. As Perry mentioned, the SDG program is doing great jobs. So we have to start doing that, but not just talking about it, because once we can put down the masks and we can reduce the distance, it's already going from 2 meters to 1 meter, we have not, or we should not forget these kind of goals. But will the average tourist think about it? I have my serious doubt. What companies have to do is take risk management much more seriously. They haven't done that, and I have been fighting or preaching or whatever you want to call that for many years. Will they do that, or will they just fall asleep again and wait until the next crisis and wake up again, as we saw happening all over the world in the last couple of months? So we have to go beyond re-emerging by asking what else can go wrong, by expecting the unexpected. And next, new or even new normal. The good news is that people will always need to eat, to drink, to sleep, and want to travel, want to meet, and have holidays. So the key to success, to all the students that are listening, you are the key to success. Because I want you to ask your universities to start teaching about crisis, what crisis, so that we can do that as we did in Nepal. And thank heaven, some of it, what we discussed before the earthquake, had a positive impact on the, of course, still dramatic situation there. At Thammasat University in Bangkok, I have been able to convince the faculty since a couple of years to have in every semester a risk and crisis management full semester, and have the students prepare and do a simulation of the evacuation of the building where this faculty is in. And now these students are telling me, they're asking the companies they have started working for, do they do it? And surprise, surprise, most don't. So we should stop doing what other people are doing, follow the blind. You, the next generation, have to make sure that my generation is starting to take risk management much more serious. Step number one, identify what the crises could be. Step number two, analyze the effect, plan and work with solutions. Then track and see how the systems are being implemented, and then control and make sure it doesn't bite you in some well-known places. Strategy number two is using a PESTEL system: political, environmental, social, technology, and economic, legal, and define the identification and the significance of that. Step number three, come up with risk registers where a company, an organization, a destination has a complete plan of how in the next 5 years or 10 years, we're going to mitigate most of the risks that we are facing. And then nothing else but scenarios. What if? Employment challenges. Another dirty sea, sustainable change, water, carbon emissions, and even World War should be not taken off the card, and there should be scenarios for that. So I hope that you too see a pattern here. We have to ask a few more people, but then I hope your organizations, your universities will take this decision, because more is lost by indecision than by wrong decisions. So the bottom line, very cute one, is stop playing ostrich. It is not working anymore. And as also Perry said already, in Australia, they thought the bushfires were the worst that could happen. Little did they know. So you can't make an omelette without breaking eggs. So destinations should respond successfully and emerge stronger and do a better job. And Taiwan and both Nepal are good examples of how that happened. And even the country I live in, Thailand, over the years did a much better job in handling crisis than they did 20 years ago. So please, to all of you, don't ask what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. And I know this is not my quote. We need more common sense. And again, looking television and reading newspapers, I see so little common sense at the moment. Where is the other side of the road? It's not going to be greener, but we have to make sure. And we have to fight the worst enemy of tourism in total, and that is greed. The moment the borders will be open, greed will take over. Understandable at one hand, because a lot of people lost a lot of money, but not always understandable from a sustainable point of view. And therefore, again, don't ask what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. So my question is very simple. In tourism, will the new normal be the old normal? And I hope that in the weeks to come, you will think about this a little bit more, and not just every time you talk about this topic, use the word new normal or next normal, and think a little bit more, because there is no new normal. There will be an old normal because of human needs not changing despite everything that has happened in the past. We have seen it in history, and we see it already happening again today. So bottom line, my goal is simple, to help you reach yours. And I hope that with this little speech, I have been able to convince a lot of you that more can be done, not by the government, but by you. And that's where it all starts. Thank you very much for having me, and I hope you have some questions.
Bert, thank you very much for joining us today, and thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and insights, because I know you've been working with so many different organizations in so many countries around the region in trying to raise awareness of being ready for doing this kind of planning. And getting to raise awareness of that with the industry has been hard enough. And I think I can sense a bit of frustration there with you, that you're finding that it's been even harder to get institutions to even think about it too. I suspect that the whole COVID challenge that's been thrown to many universities has also made them start to think about the additional crises that can suddenly come out, literally seem to come out of the blue, a black swan event, which meant many of us had to take all our teaching online. And again, most universities were totally unprepared for this situation. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us today. Now, Andy and Alan, have we got a few questions that have come in along the way?
Absolutely, Perry, and thanks very much, Bert, for a very, very interesting presentation, and thank you for sharing your thoughts with us. And David Bierman's in our audience today, and he's asking, Bert, do you really think tourism and hospitality businesses can continue a model based on high turnover and low yields? Can they and their employees reasonably expect to be bailed out by governments a second time after COVID?
No, but mass tourism is something that is there, and that, with the exception of a few countries, nobody can live without it anymore. It is something that has happened. We have in Thailand at the moment a big drive. We only want the rich tourism, but that's not going to work, because we have 8 million people working in the tourism industry. They probably have another 2 or 3 times that many dependents on that. And if we only going to look at the wonderful dream of deluxe tourism that places perhaps like the Maldives can afford, then it's not going to work. Tourism is now for everybody can travel. And I think it's a human right of everybody to have a holiday. And it's up to our industry to cater to that. And it's up to our industry to stop thinking we're deluxe 5-star and business class airlines, because they are not working anymore. What is working is the low-cost carriers. What is working is 2- and 3-star hotels, because mankind is going on holiday. And the dream of 60, 70 years ago, where people where only the rich people could travel, is, in my eyes, thank heaven, over.
You know, Bert, you mentioned about the cost of travel, but a lot of destinations focus on mass tourism, where they want large numbers. Do you think this is a good time to readjust to smaller markets, maybe higher prices, so that we can have better sustainability in some of these destinations?
Well, 2 different things. A, I think they cannot move away from mass marketing anymore, because their whole infrastructure, their whole economy is based on that. Now that we have to teach everybody more about sustainability is another topic, basically, which is but all these dreams and everybody at the moment saying, we can't have rich, or we only want to have rich tourists, it's not going to work. Because I have this little cartoon prepared. This is not how it's going to work. Do we take the rich people to a restaurant and then get the food through the back door from the people? It's not. So 8 million jobs in Thailand depend on this mass tourism. Are you going to tell 4 million people, sorry, you have to find another job? Nice meeting you. And we're only going to take the richies? No, it's not. Plus, I think in our world, again, the social structure, the demographics are changing so much, and everybody has the right for a holiday. And it's us that have to adapt to the needs of these people, and not us dreaming about what happened 60 years ago. When I flew to the States 60 years ago, the planes were half full and we had 4 seats easily, and it was only upmarket. These days are over. In my eyes, thank heaven, and good for mankind.
Yeah, it's obviously, Bert, that challenge about how we balance out the opportunity for people to have holidays with the sustainability issues, the job creation. Obviously, countries like Thailand, where 20% of the economy is dependent on tourism. So we've got an awful lot of different jobs there for people. And the challenge is going to be getting that balance going forward. And for me, one of the challenges is that often we haven't even thought about it. We've just blundered on going, well, growth is what we're after, more and more. We haven't asked whether destinations can deal with that amount of growth. And I think that's been one of the challenges so many destinations have been facing with. Anyway, Alan, Andy, we got any more questions there? I'm just looking at my screen to see. We've got a couple of
One
questions
for you,
in
Perry.
here about data.
One for you. If we don't get a vaccine in the near future, from Prashant Sharma, if we don't get a vaccine in the near future, thank you, Prashant, for the question. How should we encourage tourists to travel?
Look, I think that's a really good question. And I threw that question out there today because I hear so much about we're going to get a vaccine, we're going to get a vaccine. As I said, I don't like to be the pessimist, but we've never come up with a vaccine to deal with this kind of virus before. So yes, there's a lot of people out there working on it. There's a lot of drug companies that can imagine they can make a lot of money out of it. But the question in my mind is that actually going to be able to happen? Because this virus is a very clever virus. It's mutating very quickly. So my challenge and my thinking is that if we can't do that, what systems are we going to have to put in place? And hence my thinking that, you know, we're going to end up with counter COVID, a bit like we've had counter-terrorism measures. We are fighting a war with a virus, and we're going to have to start thinking about how we're going to do that. And you've got some countries have gone down that route, like New Zealand, got a bubble, but now their tourism problem is they can't let anybody in. So great, you've looked after your own population, but now what? Or how are we going to have to come up with better testing methods? And I think that's where probably the industry will end up with. And this is going to make the recovery of tourism, my feeling is, much more problematic. As has been discussed a little bit today, we're beginning to see green zones, travel corridors, bubbles. There's politics in this. We're seeing spikes. And I think this is not going to be a very easy path. My feeling is the next couple of years is going to be very difficult, and even beyond.
I think that's there's this whole issue of state of health versus state of the economy, and this dilemma that governments and businesses are facing.
Absolutely, and the pressure, as you know, a lot of countries have supported a lot of jobs, whether it's been in Australia, the UK, US. Other countries don't have that kind of money. The question is how long can you do this for? So the big fear for a lot of tourism operators in a lot of those countries, there's money that's available till probably September, October. If they're not back up and running then, I think the big question is we're going to see a lot of medium-sized operators not be able to survive. And that's why the later this year is going to be very crucial for tourism, depending on the seasonality issues of the markets. About whether we can find workable ways to live with this COVID situation and to deal with it. And I think that's going to be the crucial thing for us as industry, as educators to work on. Right. Andy, we got any other questions that we've got there for Bert? I'm just noticing our time today, and I think we're getting close to our end of our Q&A time. So I just wonder if we've got any other questions there.
There's only one more question there, Bert, maybe very quickly. There's already a resurgence of potentially swine flu in China. What are your thoughts there with H1N1 and potentially a second pandemic running on top of what's already happening around the world?
Well, I think one of the solutions to keep tourism going is, as the lady from Cornell University also said, we have to think about new systems. It is entirely possible to go through an airport without any touching, without any human person being involved. There are systems in place now that can control the flow purely by low touch and high tech. So the same in hotels. Every time you check in a hotel, you get the same stupid questions. Can I have your passport? What is your credit card? And here is your key. Same story all over. Why can't I check in on the way to the hotel and just nick to somebody greets me and I take my telephone, hold it in front of the door, and boom, the door is open. These are the things that will make travel safer. And these are the things we in the tourism industry have to start thinking about to make them visible and visible for everybody. And again, whether it is low cost or high cost, deluxe or not deluxe, it should be implemented everywhere. And we should be able to train, educate people that work in the industry and people that use the services of the industry to continue using this in a much more efficient way. And again, then enjoy laying on the beach, going for a hike, and eventually meeting again as we did in the old normal days, because that's what people want. They want to meet, they want to eat, they want to drink. I'm not going to talk about what they want to do during conferences or after conferences, but it is all part of the old normal, and that will not change.
Fantastic.
All right. Well, thanks very much for that, Bert. I think that's given us some food for thought again today. So very interesting presentation to have shared with everybody today about how the industry and students need to think about these sorts of things going forward. So again, thanks very much from us for doing that.
My pleasure.
We'd like to,
Thank you.
Thank you again. Thank you. And we've got a lot of academic partners to thank that help to support us. Dr. Andy, do you want to go over those?
Yeah, as far as I'm very happy to have our new academic partner, Sunway University, this week. And we have LPU and University of Santo Tomas, and our friends over at NKUHT over in Taiwan, their International Masters Program, and the Macau Tourism and Hospitality Association. And as you can see, there's the QR code for today's survey. So for those people, start copying that code. We've also put the survey code into the chat room, and we'll put that again in a little bit later on. The next slide, we are going to go through today's winner of our first background challenge. So we have
Fantastic.
reviewed the background challenges, and today we've decided to go with the funniest Zoom background. So and again, for those people that have not participated yet, go ahead and send us your backgrounds for next week, and we'll be doing this again next week. But our first submission comes from Tricia from the University of Santo Tomas, and she has applied for the funniest Zoom background. So as you can see, this is her original background. Pretty boring, pretty white screen, nothing exciting there. But you know, if you want to add a little pizzazz to your background, I think Tricia has done a great job. So there she is. She's riding a roller coaster down the hill on her background. And if you don't think that's funny, then but Tricia, congratulations. You are the first winner of a 30-minute talks challenge, and we will be contacting you to give you your prize. So thank you very much for submitting that wonderful, funny Zoom background. I feel like you're sitting on that roller coaster and going down the hill.
Yeah, fantastic.
That's right.
Congratulations, Tricia.
Yes, very much so. Great. Thank you for that. And we look forward to getting other ones coming in, don't we, Andy? There's a whole raft of these. I think that people have got to start thinking more cleverly about what they can, where they can be or would like to be.
It's very easy to do. Take your before screenshot, take your after screenshot, and send it to us, and then we'll evaluate it and show you online. As we get ready to talk about next week's topic, this topic is a little bit challenging because it's accreditation, and students are going to say, why should I listen to an accreditation one? Well, that's one of the things that you have the advantage on webinars. You will learn things that you never knew you didn't know. And if you can learn a little bit about the quality process and the accreditation process, not only would it help you select better programs and better schools, but it will help you as you start to evaluate your own companies and services in the future. And I know Dr. Perry Hobson is very involved with accreditation for many years. Perry, why don't you fill us in on this one?
Oh, look, I have been, and this for me might be a topic which sounds to me a bit as exciting as watching paint dry, but I think for students and for academics, this is actually a really interesting topic because it relates to the quality of the education that you're getting, and for educators, the quality of the education they're delivering. And this is something that's really important. I've been in my life, along with Dr. Andy and Aaron and Bert, we've all been involved in education for a long time and been able to put our hand on our heart and to say we've got quality education products, lectures, programs, structures, industry advisory boards, internships, all those things come together to make education have value to students. So I think this is a really important because although it's a hidden thing often, you tangibilize it because you go into those classrooms, you get to see the curriculum. Behind the scenes is the work we're going to be talking about and exploring next week about why accreditation is so important. Because believe me, it is. And we'll talk to a number of people who are involved in this on a day-to-day basis. And I'm very much looking forward to welcoming Dr. Pearl Lynn and Dr. Lilibeth from LPU next week to this. Andy.
Very good. And Alan will be moderating it next week. It'll be a panel discussion, and we're looking forward to it because we'll be discussing some of the accreditation, the world global accreditation bodies, the ICE, the CHED from the Philippines and others during that session. So it's a very informative, and we look forward to having you all there. And again, here is the QR code for today's survey. We'll leave this up there for a while. I've already put the survey link into the chat room, and from myself, one of the things that I said during 90 seconds today is travel locally. Many people have not been to the rice terrace. 84% of the people that are in our group, which is mostly Filipinos, have not been to the rice terraces. They have not been to Sagada, and even only 50% have been to Boracay. So take advantage of your local beautiful places because international travel will be a challenge for a while, but there's plenty of beautiful places in your own country to go visit. So enjoy, and we'll see you next week.
That's right. Look forward to seeing you next week.
Thanks very much, everybody. Thanks for joining us. See you next week. Keep safe.